Hello, welcome to ACAB True Crime, my YouTube channel. I am ACAB True Crime. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I'm going to be talking about a really interesting case that I'm sure everyone has been hearing about over the last week, and that is the case of the assassin, Luigi Mangione. And I think it's a really interesting case, not only because of the brazen act that it was, but also some of his writings and his motivations and his perspective onto why he committed this crime is interesting. And it's, I think, sparked a lot of really important conversations around systemic failures in our society and broader issues like capitalism and inequality and justice, all of those things. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about that. Let's get into it. Oh, I'm calling today's video a radical look at capitalism, healthcare, and justice, the case of Luigi Mangione. Welcome back. Hi again. Thank you all again for being here. I really appreciate it. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I would like to ask you to please consider subscribing to my channel. It's free, and my goal is to reach 500 subscribers by the end of the year. So a couple of weeks, and I'm only like 70 away. So if I could reach 500 after this video, that would be super awesome. So just something to consider. It's free. I think I mentioned that too. But also, if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. It does really help. So thank you in advance for doing that if you do. Also, I want to say hello to all of the newcomers that are here. I am ACAB True Crime, and I hope that you find your time on the channel worthwhile, and that maybe you learn something new or gain a different perspective or laugh. And then also welcome back to all of the people that are returning. I really appreciate your support, and it's great to see you back here. So I'm really excited to talk about this case today because I think that there might be a couple or few similarities between my ACAB perspective or viewpoint of my channel that I like to take, and with Luigi's. He basically, to me, sounds a little bit anti-capitalist, but honestly, I don't know if he's thought that far ahead into it. I feel like he's very focused on what he knows. He's only 26, so he obviously doesn't have a ton of experience out there. So first, I'm going to take you through a timeline of the events of the whole incident that took place, starting with the incident itself, and then I'll talk about the broader revelations and key details that we have from Luigi's manifesto, background information that we've got, and how those things shed light on what his motivations might be. And then I will, at that time, give, I guess, I'll call it a case conceptualization. I'm approaching it like if I was going to write a psych eval on him as his prison psychologist. So just trying to hit the key background points that are relevant to offender behavior. I think this is going to be a really fascinating case to dissect from a psychological viewpoint or standpoint. So I'm reviewing the video right now, and I am realizing that I don't think I ever mentioned that I am a former forensic psychologist that has had multiple years working as a prison psychologist. So just want to make that clear before we move into it, so everyone's not like, what the hell is this lady doing, thinking that she can just pretend that she's a prison psychologist or something. So just wanted to put that out there. So I think that will be cool. I actually plan to do a second video. Like, I want this one to be a little bit briefer, but I plan to do a deep dive second video into more of the details behind some of the writings that we have of Luigi's from online, and more detailed reports from past friendships. And then I will end the video connecting all of the elements to larger themes that he touches on as well, and that I feel passionately about, like justice and capitalism and societal struggles. All right, let's begin. Starting with the incident, it occurred Wednesday on December 4th, 2024 in New York City. The individual that has been arrested for the assassination of a man named Brian Thompson, who was the CEO of United Healthcare Company, like an insurance company, and he was gunned down on his way into a conference in New York City. He's actually from Minnesota, so Minnesota represents Maple Grove or something. I think Maple Grove actually, but he's 50 years old, and actually I found a mugshot of him because he got a DWI in like 2017, which is everyone. I feel like in Minnesota and the Midwest have DWIs, especially white dudes that have jobs where they have to schmooze people. So I think that's not that weird, but yeah. So what happened was Brian Thompson was walking into a conference for investors for United Healthcare Company, and it was going to be an all-day thing. And he was staying at a separate hotel. The conference was at Hilton, and he was staying down the street. And it's creepy. We'll try to find the clip, but I'm sure all of you guys have seen it anyways. But it just shows Brian Thompson walking down the sidewalk. It's not quite daylight yet, dawn. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this figure like steps to the side and then just has this gun like pointed at the back of Brian Thompson, and then you can see that he ends up pulling the trigger. And then I actually haven't watched the whole thing because I'm like, I don't really want to see that anyways. Sometimes I don't mind, but also I'm just like, it's not unless it's totally necessary. But anyways, okay, so basically that happened. Brian Thompson did not make it. The video continues. You see him fall, and then the perpetrator is masked and wearing dark clothes, and he just leaves the screen. And they end up finding out later that he took an electric bike, and then he went into Central Park, and then they found him going into the bus station, but they didn't see him leaving, so they assumed that he probably had taken a bus out of the city. So he went on the lam, the offender, or the guy who attacked Brian, and no one knew who he was, and so it ended up turning into this big nationwide manhunt. It was mysterious because, first of all, like, the CEO is obviously a big deal. Also, there was 3 unspent shell casings that had the words deny, delay, and dispose written on them, which people were theorizing might have something to do with insurance companies. It definitely sparked a dramatic series of events over the next couple of days. Brian Thompson did not make it, and the offender escapes, who they now are saying is Luigi. The way that he got caught, there was a huge manhunt for him, like across several states. They said that they had a name, but then they said that they didn't have a name. They also hadn't found the actual like weapon yet. They were searching in the lake out there, and then it took them forever to find this backpack, and it was just weird. It started a media frenzy, basically, where people were like debating and having conversations about what his motivations were and who he was. I will say that Brian Thompson, I think, grew up in Iowa, and he came from pretty humble background. I think his family were farmers or something. And then he was educated at four-year university in Iowa for business. And he ended up moving to the cities. And then it sounds like he had been working at United Healthcare for probably around 20 years or something. And in 2021, he was promoted to be the CEO. And that the profit actually had gone up from like 12 billion to 16 billion over the 3 or 4 years that he had been heading the company. So he definitely was making like significant changes in profit, and just normal old guy, except he's making millions of dollars on the backs. But I think a lot of people are just ignorant. I don't even know if he thinks about how many people he's screwing over, which is a problem. And that's part of the reason why the assassin wanted to get that point across. But yeah, the guy on the lam, who they're saying is Luigi, they did have one picture of him. They kept being like, he took his mask down to flirt, but I heard that it was at the hostel and that they made everyone, at least when they were checking in, they had to show their face once. So he was forced to do it. And that was the one picture they have of him smiling. And there was a bunch of people that were like, holy shit, this guy's like super good looking. And the people started treating him almost like iconic status. People definitely were like, man, this dude is based and knows what's up. And it was weird too. People across both aisles are like, yeah, screw the CEO of the health insurance company. And I definitely agree with that, but I don't know if the way that this guy went about it is totally the best way to go about it. I think what was interesting was to see people really starting to engage with the broader implications. If the guy that they arrested is the guy, which it seems like it, who knows? But at this point, it sounds like he had written this manifesto where he basically acknowledges, and I'll read that to you too, because I think that's pretty interesting to look into his psyche there. Some of the phrases and the way that he words things, he just sounds, yeah, I have diagnostic impressions that I want to share, but I think it's just like unfortunate all the way around. But I do think it's interesting and cool, and at least we're going to get hopefully something positive out of a negative in terms of being able to talk about confronting difficult topics that people really haven't been willing or wanting or able to really confront. For a while then, it seemed like he was on the lam and that he had gotten away with it, and pretty much they just had pictures of his eyes. No one really knew anything, but then he ended up being apprehended in a McDonald's in a town in Pennsylvania called Altoona. And actually, I'll share a picture that I have of him, which I think is funny because there's not a ton of pictures of him online. There's a handful of pictures that are out there from his Facebook and some statements from his Twitter and some book reviews from Goodreads and stuff like that. But one of the few pictures that they have is him holding up a McDonald's kids meal. So I thought that was funny. I was like, apparently he likes McDonald's, what I do too. So I get that. But also, it's just interesting if you think about his potential stance against healthcare. It's a little ironic that he ends up getting tracked going to Starbucks in the morning and then now eating at McDonald's. But yeah, then when they ended up arresting him, they actually were tipped off by a McDonald's employee. And a lot of people online were getting snotty about it. They were like leaving reviews on the McDonald's restaurant, like Google review, being like, "There's so many rats there." This person like read them out, but pretty sure that they were offering $50,000 or $60,000 as a reward. So I can understand if you're someone who is living in poverty, working at McDonald's, and you don't really give a shit about some manifesto and politics. You're just wanting to pay the bills, and you're probably not going to be able to. And you see an opportunity to make $60,000 or $50,000. I don't necessarily blame that person, but yeah, a lot of people are perturbed about that. I want to also add here really quick that there is something that goes along with the ACAB idea, and that is the fact that most of the time when you do report someone for a reward, they find shady ways to get out of actually having to pay you that, and that seems to be the case with this particular case as well. We're showing here that the McDonald's worker is not going to get the full reward, and that almost always happens. So I just want to put that out there. It's shady and not worth turning people in. But the thing that bothers me about all of this is, yeah, it's like a good thing to talk about and acknowledge and brainstorm and reflect upon. But there's a lot of also not realistic aspects to this story that I think people are looking at a little bit idealistically and not really considering the reality of the situation. For example, or he's like, screw the CEO of the healthcare company and the insurance company. And yes, I completely agree. The insurance companies are evil, and so are all the lobbyists and all the politicians. But we are the ones that elect these politicians, and we continuously elect people that just rip us off, which, in my opinion, if there's money in politics, it's basically impossible to not have influences like pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies. And of course, they're not going to go against their own interests of being lobbied by these companies that are making so much money. It would never make sense for people to go against that unless you're not at all interested in being wealthy. But since we live in America and that is the way that we set up our views of who is successful and worthy in our society. But okay, sorry, I got a little distracted there. Anyways, he was found in McDonald's and he had apparently a 3-page manifesto on him. And then they also found, which I think is pretty weird, and to me, there is a lot of signs that I'm picking up on with him that suggest that he might be delusional. He is really smart and has like a lot of ideas, but I think the man is definitely struggling with some significant mental health problems and might not be thinking completely. He might be disorganized in his thought processes and grandiose or magical type thinking. I'll get into diagnostic impressions in the future, but they did find that on him also the GUN that looked like it had been used in the attack. And what's interesting, I think it was like a 32 or something like that. And you can tell in the video that the GUN ends up getting jammed. And so it was like after the first time that he, shot the gun, it hit Brian in the back of the leg, and then he fell forward. And then it looks like he got out like another shot or two, but then the gun looks like it jammed and he's having to hit it and then goes back at it. But then when they did arrest him at McDonald's, they found a very similar gun to the one that was used in the crime, and they called it like a ghost GUN, and it was made by a 3D printer, they think, which is really interesting. I've heard about this 3D printer thing, and it's hard for me to imagine, but this guy that they arrested is undergrad major of computer science. So someone that would be privy to technology, maybe a 3D printer is that difficult, but I just have no idea how to do that shit. So when I hear that, I'm like, wow, you can actually just to me, that seems weird. Where are these 3D printers? You know what I mean? But it also made sense to me that it jammed because I was like, oh, well, if you made it with a 3D printer, but I just want to see how one of those works. But anyway, so anyways, his arrest ended up marking a significant turning point in the case itself because it shifted from where everyone was excited. There was this big manhunt, and it was fun watching law enforcement looking stupid while they were laying around and had no idea where to find him. And then he got off of just some lowly worker at McDonald's. But isn't that the way it is? They always, the working class against the working class, and we're going to hate those people. But that's not really the people that we should be focusing on. But that's what shit. That's bad. By the way, this is Michaela. She's the best girl. I like it when she hangs out with me for my videos. She's kind of like my weird animal. Okay, so we'll get back into this stuff. So after Luigi's capture, the public attention shifted from the manhunt onto looking into Luigi's backgrounds and trying to find out additional information so we can start to analyze what his motivations would be. I saw a lot of things of him writing about systemic failures within America and specifically the healthcare system, and just talking a lot about inequality. I took it more, I guess I interpreted a lot of his writing as him voicing his frustration with capitalism, but he pretty much is only talking about the healthcare industry at this point. But I feel like he might be a little bit rigid in his thinking and maybe hasn't been exposed to other opportunities to apply this type of thought process towards other systems or social systems, if that makes sense. Also, I thought that his writings and actions definitely showed that there apparently is a need for him and or a desire for him to challenge these oppressive systems that he sees in play. What I mentioned before, when he was walking into the courthouse, he got out of the cop car and just started yelling. And the first word or two was jumbled, but I did put it in slow motion and figure out what he said after the rest of it. And he says to the press, he's like, "We're completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people and their lived experiences." He's a pretty bright, intelligent guy. I think he's articulate, he's a good writer, and he obviously has the ability to understand greater concepts and philosophical topics. We also learned more about Luigi's personal history, and we got that information from going through public records and also having testimonies from people that knew him that are coming out and speaking out about him. And so far, from what I've seen, it's pretty positive. There has been, it sounds like, some increased difficulties or challenges over the last 6 months to a year in terms of his ability to form connection and stay in touch with people. But before that, it sounded like everyone appreciated him and he was really smart. This other information that we got about his personal history, we found out specifics about his education, a little bit about his whereabouts in terms of where he's been living over his lifetime, and then also some of his psychosocial relationships. But overall, I think a lot of his writing is critiquing pretty harshly the healthcare system. And he specifically talks about the greed and the predatory nature of these systems and how they're exploitative in nature. And I agree with him that it is wrong what our country is currently doing with the insurance system. I also feel like the for-profit education system and money in politics, I think I mentioned that earlier. So I appreciate some of the concepts that he's bringing to the table and that people seem to be giving further thought to. I'll read you a couple quotes from his manifesto that I think expresses pretty explicitly his beliefs about the healthcare system. So he says in his manifesto, "This healthcare system does not heal, it profits from the perpetual suffering of others," which I guess that's, in my opinion, any capitalistic structure or system. And then the second quote from his manifesto says, "The blood of this industry stains the hands of everyone who participates." And to me, that suggests that he's saying he's not participating in this anymore as long as we all comply or are, what's that word where you're, I think I was thinking of the word complacent. So we're just going to go with that. You know it's wrong, but you don't really say anything and you just participate anyway. He's saying passive participation is still active participation in his mind. The reason why I haven't been online as much over the last couple of weeks as I really wanted to be, something came up in my professional life that took a lot of work and that was pretty important to me. And it actually aligns really well with what I think Luigi is trying to get across here. But it has to do with the for-profit education system and the predatory nature of loans and fraudulent schools just created to rip off federal funds and not actually provide students what they said that they would. So I'll just say I went to Washington, D.C. last week, and I was involved with a rally and some other activism. There was actually a press release that took place with 3 senators, Dick Durbin, Senator Markey from, I believe, Massachusetts, and then Maxine Waters was also part of the press release, and they all spoke out against the for-profit, predatory, fraudulent higher education schools and just education in general. And I have been significantly affected by that really crappy system myself, which is why I felt compelled to go to DC last week and advocate. I believe that, especially in the richest country in the entire world, that we should be able to provide what I consider very basic human rights, such as basic healthcare needs, a right to an education, and a right to clean resources like clean water and equality, at least equality in those basic human rights. And America misses that mark in our current system of the way that they do things. Anyways, I digress. But looking at all of the elements put together that we have been able to gather from and about Luigi over this week and a half, I think what I see is an individual, a man who is really grappling with these oppressive and exploitative systems and societal structures and tying that into his own personal suffering and pain. That's super relatable to so many people. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the systems that he's struggling in or the actual suffering and pain that he is specifically experiencing. I think it's a very relatable concept to everyone that lives in a system like America and they aren't part of the elite, part of that oligarchy or like the ruling class or whatever. They are likely being exploited. Going into the rest of the video, I think the best way to go about it is, like I said, I'm going to do the second video where I'll do a deep dive into really specifically all of the books that he talked about on Goodreads and what all of his friends are saying and get more into those details. For this video, I want to go into who he is, and the way to go about doing that is I pretended I was Luigi's prison psychologist doing a psych evaluation on him. I am not making any actual diagnoses, and I can't, as a mental health practitioner, diagnose anyone that I haven't actually met with face to face or over some type of Zoom meeting. But I can talk about my diagnostic impressions of him and give you the reasons why I think that he fits into those conceptualizations. If you guys are frustrated, I don't know why recording these videos takes me so long. It's frustrating. But okay, anyways, I wanted to keep this video to be like 20 minutes, but I think it's going to be more like 40. But anyways, so what I'm going to get into now is a little bit of background information that we have on Luigi that has been coming out since he's been caught. The sections of the report that I'm going to be going over are the psychosocial history itself for Luigi, the developmental history, educational and vocational history, medical history, mental health history, behavior patterns and key stressors, personality traits and cognitive functioning, and then risk assessment and theoretical analysis, case conceptualization. So we'll just get right into the first section, which is the psychosocial history. So this section usually just touches on someone's cultural influences, their background, relationships, like key relationships to them, their social development and in childhood and throughout life, and then also other significant life events that have happened to that person. So go over Luigi's. What I wrote down that I thought were worthy of mentioning in this first video is, I would say cultural influences for him are that he comes from it seems like a pretty well-to-do or like elite family, an affluent family, I guess you would say. His cousin or uncle is a representative in, I think, Pennsylvania or something like that, somewhere on the East Coast. And when Luigi got arrested, he made a statement. I think he's a state representative. And it seems like people are saying, which this is interesting, this family will invest in different businesses. It sounds like there are some healthcare facilities that his family owns. I thought that was pretty interesting to think about. They also own golf courses, and I don't know, they're just basically investors. But yeah, there's not like a ton of healthcare facilities, and I bet it's probably those group homes with people with developmental disability. I feel like I remember hearing that you can make decent money, which is really crazy to think that people actually use those just situations or environments to make money. And I think that's probably a little bit of what Luigi's talking about, or at least what I think he might be trying to get across. He's probably seen intimately and in depth the way that insurance companies interact with these healthcare facilities and never really advocating for the client. The client is completely removed from any of it. So also, I think it's worth noting too, someone that comes from probably a privileged background like he does. I think probably his family or his just the environment that he's in. I think he went to prep school for high school and he went to the University of Pennsylvania for college. I'm sure his family expected to see him and had certain ideas, and not just his family, but like all of society has this idea of what people have to do in order to be successful. And it depends on gender and class and jobs and sexual orientation, all that stuff. Luigi is experiencing some external stressors, and it creates a pressure cooker environment when you have someone that has these very rigid expectations of who they will be. And he was valedictorian in high school, so obviously he's smart, and you have to work pretty hard to, even if you're just like naturally a genius, you still have to like do work in order to be a valedictorian. I'm sure he had his own opinions on what he needed to do to be successful. I think setting ourselves up in an environment and social system like that is pretty much creating people to set up for failure. There's only a certain amount of, we're all human, no one's perfect. And eventually someone's going to screw up doing something. Everything is not going to go perfect the way that you want it to. And when you have these high expectations and grandiose ideas or like unrealistic viewpoints in America that this is what you should be doing, and when it's not okay to feel vulnerable and it's not okay to feel like you aren't good at something. So I think that actually contributes to a lot of issues that we see with some of these mass shooters. I actually did a case conceptualization on my own last year on what incels are, and I came up with a theory. And I think a lot of it does stem from what I talked about, that we set ourselves up for failure. We instill these standards and beliefs and values on arbitrary bullshit things that are based off of a capitalistic society that's only looking out for the profit and greed of corporations and powerful people, not for the workers. But yet we like base our whole worth system on that. So it's just silly and dumb. And I feel like a lot of times the ones that we see end up going off the deep end and doing weird stuff, like being like an incel person that goes and, what was that, Papa Rogers or Elliot Rogers. I like read his manifesto, and it's weird. I don't know, I do feel bad for these guys because they are going to set up for failure, and the way that they're taught to deal with those feelings are to be aggressive and angry and to get attention and do something extreme. So it's just not great. It's like a recipe for disaster. But anyways, moving on. Right, so also he seems to have lived in a couple of different places, and if you look at the history of his moves and where he's moving and how his mental health is doing at those same times, interesting. I mean, we seem to align with one another. So he grew up, we think, on the East Coast. We don't really know exactly details about his past. I was wondering because he got reported missing by his mother as like a missing person. This is Luigi. It was like exactly a week before the Brian Thompson incident took place. And I guess his mom was looking around. His whole family didn't know where he was. He had been off the grid for a long time, and they were starting to get really worried about him. And they were reaching out to his friends, and his friends were trying to reach out to him, and he just was not responsive. To me, that's pretty significant and suggests that he was having some, honestly, I think he is definitely dealing with something like delusional or psychosis. Or I could see him having affective disorder, or maybe even like there's a weird time period before when men develop schizophrenia, and like a lot of times schizophrenia doesn't show up in an individual, especially males, until their mid-20s, sometimes even late 20s. And he's 26. And he experienced a couple of, I'd say, I don't know, significant events over the past few years that I'll get into that I think could have like also contributed and exacerbated these issues that he already was starting to have difficulties or struggles with. But I could see this being, so yeah, there's this interesting pre-phase of schizophrenia. And I don't even know if this is actually still in, I should go grab my DSM. But there is, I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called like prodromal schizophrenia or something. And it's basically like this time period where it's before the full-on schizophrenia symptoms show itself completely and explicitly. But this period of time that's usually a year, a couple of years before the actual full-on onset where there's psychosis, and you can definitely tell that they're delusional and something's wrong. But it seems, especially in younger males, that there will be this 1 or 2 year period in the beginning where they're just seeming a little off, but it's not explicit psychosis or anything. So I feel like that could also be a potential diagnostic impression of him. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to officially diagnose that until he fully develops all of the symptoms in a year or two, but just something interesting to think about and something I will be keeping an eye on moving forward with his case. So when his mom filled out the missing person report like 2 weeks ago, she filled it out in San Francisco. But also it looks like he went to school in high school and college in Pennsylvania. So we know he's affiliated with Pennsylvania, but his parents or his mom for sure lives in California. So I wonder, it'd be interesting to know what the sequence of events there is. Did he go to the East Coast for a boarding school? Maybe, I know that there are some boarding schools out east. Actually, I know a friend of mine, like this group of guy friends when I was in high school, that got arrested for armed robbery when we were like 15 and 16 years old. And there was 4 of them, and they were our crew. Like it was like my group of girlfriends, and then that was the guy friends that we hung out with. And they all got sent to pretty serious armed robbery is pretty big deal, even as a juvenile. And they were like 15 or 16. One of them like got sent out to this, I'm pretty sure it was in Pennsylvania, and it was like a boarding school. I think it was called Glen Mills. But I think it was pretty well known, and I don't know if it was only for juvenile detention people or if it also went along with other state school options. I wonder if it's something like that, because that would be him leaving California and going to school out in Pennsylvania. So that'd be interesting if that did happen. He's pretty well off, so his family probably would have the resources to be able to do something like that. Then after he went to University of Pennsylvania. And after he finished his college, where he got a master's and his undergrad in computer science, he moved to Hawaii for a while. And he was like living in a co-living space in Waikiki. And he lived there until 2022. And it's interesting, there have been a couple of people that were from that same community that have spoken out, given interviews about their perspective on or reaction to this all going on. And they were all saying that they really liked him. He definitely seemed like he was regarded among the people that he lived there with. And he sounded like he was pretty socially active. He started actually, I read in college too. I'll get into that more in detail next video. But in college, he started like a gamer group, and he invented like a computer game or something at college, which is pretty impressive to me. And I've heard he's also really into the ideas and perspectives behind AI and its integration into our current social systems and learning ways. But he started a book club in Hawaii, and that's where I have gotten a lot of information, or where a lot of my into what I think his mindset is right now comes from, is the Goodreads. It's a website where it sounded like he was doing this book club that he would meet up with people in Hawaii, and then he would write reviews, and you can also apparently see what they are reading at the time. So I wrote down and did some deep dives into the different books and what they were talking about. So I'm going to present all of that in the next video. He was definitely active doing that. But it sounds like his friends in Hawaii started noticing that. So he has chronic back pain, and he has 4 screws in his back. I mean, he has daily chronic pain. That in itself is depressing, and I'm sure it's pretty isolating as well. When you have chronic pain, you can't really do stuff. They know that they should really like surfing, but then he would try to go with his friends, and his back would just be too much, and he wouldn't be able to do it. And I guess he also mentioned to a friend of his that he felt that because of his injuries on his back and his pain level, that he wasn't able to be intimate with someone or be in a romantic relationship, which I just want to cut in there real quick, because I actually, not to be like, I know it all, but this is, I think, significant. I did my dissertation on the effectiveness of mindfulness-based interventions and treatment on aging individuals' sexuality. So problematic sexual issues in populations over 65. And a lot of the times we do see that older individuals have more issues of chronic pain or incidents of chronic pain. They might be disabled or have had a stroke, or just a normal wear and tear on people's bodies. Mobility issues are harder, and obviously you're not be able to like necessarily get all crazy and throwing each other around. But I found in my dissertation, and I did a ton of background research on it, and mindfulness-based interventions are actually really good for any sexual disorders or sexual problems. And I think it makes sense because it really just helps you be not so focused on these external factors, but really present in your body and in the moment. So when you're distracted and you're anxious about something that hurts, or being embarrassed because something hurts and you're with someone that you like, being able to remove yourself from those thoughts and be like, okay, I acknowledge them, they're there, but I'm not going to feed into them, and then try to refocus your attention on wherever in your body that either isn't in pain or that you're feeling pleasure. It's really interesting stuff, and I feel bad for Luigi. I feel like I'm starting to get the impression from just learning different things about him and seeing his interactions. He definitely seems to be, I mean, he's super smart, but he seems to be like a little naive. Maybe he's 26 years old, and he just seems to have a very rigid and grandiose or idealistic mode of thinking and looking at the world. I don't think necessarily is a bad thing, but it can be when you are struggling with issues that really don't have a lot of ability to change. I mean, sometimes people with chronic pain have to live with chronic pain, and yeah, you can take pain medications and do different stretches, but it's always going to be there. And I think mindfulness-based interventions is a really good way to deal with that. So maybe I'll write Luigi a letter in jail and let him know that he should look into mindfulness-based interventions if he's worried about his pain. So wrapping up the Hawaii thing, his friends started to notice near the end of the time that he was living there. So they said in 2022 he moved back from Hawaii, and it was because of his back issues, and they could tell that he was becoming more depressed and frustrated and angry, and that he was planning to move back to the States, which it looks like he moved to California to get this back surgery. So I don't know exactly what happened with the back surgery, but it seems like he went to Hawaii and got the back surgery, and then he decided to move to Japan. And as you can see, it just seems as he probably started to deal with more issues with the pain, and then becoming probably more angry and frustrated and discontented with the whole healthcare system, just from his situation that he's in and the perspective that he brings into the situation. But he decided to move to Japan. So to me, I'm like, you already are, you moved to Hawaii, which is pretty much the furthest away you can get. Like, from mainland and still be in the United States. Then he gets back and then he decides to move to Japan, which is actually like completely across the world. And I don't know if he speaks Japanese or not, but I imagine if he's moving up to Japan by himself in pain and maybe doesn't even know the language, it would be really isolating and probably pretty depressing. And then it gives him a bunch of opportunity to sit and ingest all of this information. He's hyper focused on certain injustices. And I get it. I do the same thing. But you also need to remember and know how to know when it's not healthy for you at this point and it's not benefiting anyone. It's probably where he got hung up. I do feel bad for him because I do think that he probably is, even though this seems very plotted and planned and like he came up with this big idea, he's still only 26 years old. And I bet ask him in 20 years if this is a good idea. And I don't know, maybe you will think it is, but we shall see. So he moved to Japan and became increasingly isolated and then radicalized. Seems like he, in Japan, also really started to be disengaged from family, friends, and the world in general. Again, like I mentioned, I can see the trajectory of the movement of his decrease in mental health symptoms and medical symptoms and more of the increase in isolation and ruminating type thoughts. Then social development, key relationships for him. There's not much to say. I already mentioned about his community that he lived with down in Hawaii. It seems like he was socially engaged down there, but it seems like, again, the more issues that he's having with this pain, the more isolated he's becoming and just less connections that he's having, all contributing to each other, like making him isolated and discontented. To wrap up that with him, I think that stands out the most to me about all of that is that all of these factors that he's dealing with and how much they can and probably did really contribute to where he is now and how he came to decide to be this potentially, allegedly, I don't know, I don't even know what you would call him. What does he want to be? He's wanting to leave some type of legacy. And I'm not saying this is the only thing that is contributing to his decisions and actions, but I do think that it's a good glimpse and reminder into how much isolation can really impact a person's psyche and overall well-being. And, right, we see it with COVID, that was awful. I think that happens a lot with elderly people just in general. They end up feeling very isolated, which is sad. I think that really needs to change in our society too. We need to be more appreciative of our elders and treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve, and don't treat them like they're just a burden on society. I did this report on a couple of zones, and there's this researcher who looked at the 4 places in the world that had the highest life expectancies, and then he visited each of them and found what similarities that they had with one another. And that was really interesting. But one of the things that was consistent across all the 4 places was that in those communities or cultures that they lived in, that the elderly person or that the more of the grandma and grandpa generation were treated like they were looked up upon, not looked down upon, and they felt like they had meaning and that they were worthwhile to their society and not feeling like they were such a burden to everyone. As I think a lot of older people end up feeling that. That's why my grandpa partially passed away the way that he did. I know that he's feeling that he couldn't take care of himself anymore and that he was a hindrance, and it was really sad because it's not true and we all get old, you know what I mean? Section is the developmental history. So that we'll talk a little bit about his childhood, his development in adulthood, and then his family of origin. I don't know a ton of information on this, but like I said, we know that he was raised in a pretty well-to-do family, upper middle class, and that he was successful in his education levels and learning concepts. But after he graduated, we see him go on a decline. And even though he achieved academic success, I don't know if that always necessarily equates to your happiness and well-being and feelings of worth in real life. I think he was starting to feel dissatisfied with what he had, like I mentioned earlier, probably set himself in his mind that he wanted to be. I think the significant things that have happened in his adulthood that contributed to his overall presentation right now is his chronic pain. I think the surgery seems to be like it was, I want to know what happened with that surgery because it sounds like he had it, and then that's when he got isolated into. So he was made high expectation placed upon him. He might have felt that some of those achievements didn't make him feel fulfilled. And then when he started feeling these physical challenges and chronic back pain and not being able to actually even be healthy and active, it probably left him vulnerable to feeling more existential despair, I guess you could say, or probably had trouble finding joy and fulfillment. I think that's important to think about too, is just like how we do think about success as a society. And it's noteworthy that all of our ideas of success are founded in these ideas behind achievement and productivity. But if you think about it, it's really just society or these corporations being like, hey, prove to us that you're going to be able to work really well for us. You're going to be able to produce whatever we need you to produce, and you're going to do it well and quick, and then we can make a profit. That's all they care about. So I do think that we should start challenging that paradigm of thinking in terms of how we find success and what is success in our life. And I am totally guilty of that too. I'll get into it in throughout my channel in the future, but I have major issues with shame and embarrassment and guilt, and I feel a big loser that I'm not doing what I set out to do in my grad school program and leaving the whole kind of psych field because I was so over that whole. I was like, screw you guys, but also it was like, damn it, now I look like I'm just someone who can't finish out what I set to do, even though I actually made a conscious decision. But still behind it, I have a lot of shame, and I think that's a problem. It doesn't allow people to be transparent with their vulnerabilities. It doesn't allow people to connect and be able to support each other, and it isolates people and turns people into weirdos like Luigi. Okay, so he graduated from high school in 2016 as valedictorian from Gilman School in Baltimore. And then to the University of Pennsylvania, he graduated in May of 2020. So it sounds like, that's right in the middle of COVID. So that sucks. It sounds like he moved. Oh, he must have maybe moved down to Hawaii. So he left Hawaii in 2022 after how long he was down there. So yeah, he earned both a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and a Master of Science in Engineering, and his degree was in computer science. And yeah, I think this might be a good example of him being really successful in school, but not really exchanging into the real world. And again, highlights the fact that our idea of what an accomplishment or success is comes at the expense of our emotional and social well-being, because those don't go hand in hand at all. Our job was not to be put here on this earth to work our asses off for some rich oligarch. I'll tell you that, and that's what we're dealing with at this point. So, and I related to Luigi with that. His writings really did reflect, I think, this tension. He was criticizing structures that prioritize profits and achievements over just a collective humanity. Yeah, and I don't know, and I'll just put it out there now, but I think it does raise the broader question of how do these systems that are built on competition and profit at any expense, how do we find purpose and meaning within those? And I think a lot of it is being brainwashed by what we let society tell us is meaning. But when you really get to the bottom of it and truly think about yourself and the rest of humanity, maybe these aren't the things we should be focusing on. Okay, so even though I still have a lot more that I want to talk about and information that I want to share with you guys, I think I am going to call it quits on this video for now. I don't want this to turn into a full-on documentary, and this has already been a lot, right? And so, yeah, I'll just summarize what we talked about. We talked about the Luigi Mangione case and his alleged red room of the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. And we also talked about Luigi's little adventure on the lam and his capture, and also a little bit about his background and some of the factors that I think probably were contributing to his decisions and actions on that morning. So allegedly, I think this case is super interesting, and I think it really ties into a lot of important broader issues that are currently important to think about, and stuff like individual struggles and systematic failures and how everything seems to all roll in to make it be not a good thing. I am really excited to cover a lot more stuff in the next video and a bunch more information I've been finding out. And I'm planning on doing a deep dive into a lot of his writings and the books that he was reading and his time in Japan, and then more details that I found out about his family history and also mentors that he's had and friends where he was corresponding with them. And then also I do want to touch on some of those broader societal issues and talk about a little bit of how I think differently from Luigi in some manners, but also I really do think that he's talking about a lot of factors that I completely agree with too. Thank you so much for sticking with me. If you're still here, I really appreciate you. And I apologize if this video is a roller coaster ride, but anyways, I am ACAB True Crime. I will see you guys on the next one. And yeah, until then, peace out. Bye.